Today is October 22nd, 2018. I'm Adrienne Falaise here with John Aniston for the Interviews, an Oral History of Television, and we are in North Hollywood, California.
Very well done.
Why, thank you. Okay, thanks so much for sitting down with us today, John.
My pleasure.
So we'd like to start just by getting some background information. So the first question is, what was your name at birth?
Ioannis Anastasakis.
That's beautiful. When did you start going by John Aniston?
Oh, my father came to the States in 1910 and was all over the place, eventually settled in Casper, Wyoming. And he had, there was 2 restaurants and a little newspaper cigar store stand in the middle of town. And they had a hard time with his name and his cousin's name, and so they decided that they would change it. So he changed it to Aniston. He had a friend of his whose name was Anastasios Polizoropoulos, and he changed it to Dick Brown. He said, if I'm going to make it easy for him, I'll make it easy for him. But I used Aniston my whole life. I did use Anastasakis once when I went to college. And I was registering, and they said, were you ever known by any other name? And I said, no, not really. He said, what do you mean, not really? He said, well, I was born Anastasakis, but I never used it. Oh, well, if that's your real name. The red tape that was involved by that was unbelievable.
I'm sure.
I almost had to go to court to get a degree that said Aniston on it. But I was 18 months old when I came to the States. My father had already been here. He came here. The war, First World War, he went back in the Army. Came back here. Casper, where he was a boom town. It was an oil town, but not a good oil town. So the wells used to, every 10 years or so, they had to cap them and let the pressure build up. Otherwise, it was not profitable to pump. And he went back home. And then the economy in Europe got bad. Came back again. He was back like 3 times. I was the 4th time, I think, that he had come back. In the meantime, he had gotten married. My sister was born. My brother was born. Back to Wyoming, my sister was born. Back to Greece, I was born. So it was a lot of running around.
Sounds it. So when were you born, and where in Greece were you born?
I was born on a small island in the Mediterranean. Actually a big island. I was born in Crete. And I was born there in 1933.
And what was your father's name?
Antonios.
And how about your mother?
Steliani. Stella.
So when they came to the States, well, what brought them to the States when you came over when you were 18 months?
The economy.
Mm-hmm.
My father had he'd had restaurants over here. They were a hearty group of guys, my father's friends. In fact, the church that I grew up in, there were 83 families. There was only 1 man that worked for somebody else. Everybody else had their own business. May have been a banana pushcart, but it was their own business. So, yeah. Where were we?
So did they have a restaurant in the U.S. when you were little?
Yeah, he had the restaurants in Wyoming. He came back. On my trip back, he was detoured to Chester, Pennsylvania. Met a guy on the boat, and the guy says, oh, Chester's a wonderful place. You ought to. So that's where we went to Chester. We didn't last very long in Chester. And we moved a little way down the road, which was a little town called Eddystone. which is where I went to through high school. And then once high school was over, I was history.
So did you speak Greek at home then?
I spoke Greek before I spoke English
And learned English in school?
and learned English in school.
Do you speak any other languages?
I can get fed in Spanish.
It's a good skill.
Yes.
So what were some of your interests when you were little?
I don't know. Sports mostly, with most young guys. And that's how I got started in theater, because I hurt my leg. Didn't hurt it. I had what they called an epiphysis of the hip. My hip grew, no, my bones grew too fast. Somebody was not keeping up with somebody else. And I used to run around, and if I would run and just fall over for no apparent reason, the joint would just give out. So I had to stop playing football. And I still played basketball for a year. But when I left the football team, Evelyn Young was my English teacher. Said, as long as you're not playing football, we have a wonderful play we're doing. So.
So did you take to performing right away? Did you like it?
Well, yeah, the first play we did, we're going to get in a lot of trouble today because I can't remember anything anymore.
That's okay. Anything you can remember.
Can't take it with you. And I played Kolenkov, who was the ballet teacher. And the following year, I did another play, my senior year, and I have no idea what it is. I knew I had a full beard, and I carried a gun.
Sounds pretty good.
But other than that, and I only know that because it was a picture, which is still around somewhere.
So at that point, did you have any idea what you wanted to be when you grew up?
No, no. And that's how I went to college, and they said, well, you have to pick a major. I said, why do I have to pick a major? He said, because you have to have one. All right, what do you think you'd like to do? And the only thing I'd done up until then that I enjoyed was acting. So I said, I'll be an actor.
And where did you go to college?
Penn State.
So did you take acting classes and directing classes, or what kind of classes did you take?
I had some acting, like one acting class. They really weren't, they had a theater department because Arthur Clothing was the head of it, and he was a very prominent, he was the authority on Henrik Ibsen. And some good, Kelly Yetten was on the staff. Kelly Yetten was in Kastner's Producing the Play, which is like the Bible of theater programs in colleges. And Kelly wrote the chapter on the Arena Theater, because the Arena Theater was very new then. Before that, everything was a proscenium. Mm. So, yeah, so I got my degree was a bachelor's degree in arts and letters with a concentration on theater.
Did you gravitate towards any types of role, dramatic plays, musicals, comedies?
Well, it was competitive. You had to, what did I do? I did Medea. I played Jason in Medea. I see the pictures that I have. There was something about the Army because I had a whole stage full of guys in uniform. And what else? And then I went on from there. I did 2 seasons of stock while I was still in college.
In college.
And actually, I got paid for that too, $17 a week.
Were you touring at all, or where did you go to do stock?
No, stock. It was Allenbury Playhouse. I would say at that time, 75% of the actors in New York had been to Allenbury Playhouse. It was one of those rare. It was one of those rare theaters that was successful from the very first day that it opened.
Were there talent scouts or casting directors or anything that would come there to look at people?
No. But everybody then did stock.
Mm-hmm.
You did an apprenticeship. Now, I asked my daughter once when she was going to performing arts in New York, I said, what do you guys talk about when you get together? And she said, oh. I know. I said, who what are the hot plays? I don't know. Well, who's doing stock? Are there any stars that are? I don't know. What do you people talk about when you get together? We talk about movies, TV shows, and who's producing what. They just had no interest
In plays.
in doing regional theater or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So at that time, this was what, the early 1950s when you graduated?
I graduated from Penn State in '55.
Okay. So television is kind of taking off around that time.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you saw television?
Yeah.
What did you see?
I was passing a bar and there was a football game on TV. No, that couldn't have been the first one. That was the first color TV I saw.
Mm.
And I was just amazed.
Yeah.
First black and white. My neighbor, my best friend, lived across the street from me. They bought a TV. They bought a Zenith, one of those round screens. And we got one shortly after that. Yeah. Magical.
Mm-hmm. Did you like to watch certain types of shows, mysteries or westerns?
You know, the only thing I can remember we watched was the Hit Parade. They used to have, you know, the countdown, 10, 9, 8, #1 song of the week. That was very big. And, yeah.
So what did you do when you graduated then?
Well, still had to do conscription then. Everybody had to be in the Army or into something. So I graduated and I went to my draft board. I said, when are you going to draft me? He said, maybe July. I said, next month? He said, no, July next year. I said, well, what I do? I go out and start a career, and then in the middle of when I get things going, you're going to say, oh, go to Korea. The draft board wasn't going to draft me for over a year. So I went to the Navy recruiter, and I said, if I go to OCS, when can I go? That's Officer Candidate School. And I said, we can get you in the September class. This is June. I said, I think I'll do that. So I had to do, was 4 months for the program, for the OCS. And then it was 3 years. 3 years that you had to do afterwards. But the way it works out, I did something. It was going to be 3 years or 2 years. I don't know. I ended up doing about 4 months extra. So it worked out very well, and I got to be an officer instead of a grunt.
So did you wind up going to Korea?
No, they said, what would you like? What duty would you like? You filled out a questionnaire. And I said, I would like shore duty in Paris, please. And they didn't quite see it that way. But they assigned me to an admiral staff in Panama.
What was that like?
It was all right. I was in the district intelligence office. And I boarded ships that were going through the canal, gathering information on cargo, what they had, a lot of copper coming up from Chile and where it was going. And there was a big communist scare then, into the McCarthy and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we kept track of the movement of seamen that were involved in that sort of thing.
Wow.
And I did, in 2 years that I was down there, I did 9 plays in a little local theater.
Really?
So I think I did more work for the theater than I did for the Navy.
And who was the audience for these plays? Fellow?
Expatriates, a lot of the servicemen. We did some good plays. And yeah.
So then you finished your time with the Navy.
Finished my time with the Navy. My last year was in Boston as a pimp for the Navy.
Pimp for the Navy. Explain that a little more.
The sign on the thing said Office of Naval Officer Procurement. The only time I'd ever heard procurement before was pimps. And I just traveled around New England, extolling the virtues of a career as an officer in the Navy. It was fun. Good job.
So from there, how did you start your professional acting career?
Well, my friends from college who were already in New York, I had done 2 seasons of stock and became very friendly with several of the actors. They were all New York actors. And they taught me about making rounds in New York. I used to go around from producer's office to producer's office or casting office to casting office. There was one in particular that had a little, you opened the door, there was a little hallway and a little window about that big. You stuck your head in the window. Anything? No. Oh, wait a minute. Come here. Nah, forget. That was it.
So they just evaluate like how you looked,
Yes.
if you were right for a part?
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, we'd go over to Rockefeller Center, watch the skaters, and then we'd go home. And I told these buddies, and I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. You're never going to get a job doing this. He said, well, that's the idea. You don't want to be working too much. Anyway, we had a good time. And from that, actually, I did get some work. And that's when I got involved with Little Mary Sunshine.
So was that your first paid professional gig?
Well, no, because I had done the Brenner. And
What was the Brenner?
Brenner was a cop show.
You did an episode?
Yeah, an episode of that.
Just a guest spot?
Yeah.
So your first paid gig ever was on a TV show?
No, before that I'd done Laura, which was
Laura.
a play.
Okay. In New
that
York?
some enterprising college student peddled around colleges and high schools in suburban Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. And we did a production at this high school. Audience, basketball court, stage. We did it arena style on the basketball court. Problem with that is if you go up on your lines, there was no way to get a cue to you because closest you could get to the stage was about 50 feet.
Yeah.
You go, the Lord is gone. Anyway, that was the first play I ever got paid, first acting job I ever got paid for. I made $25.
Nice.
And we did it twice, I think. And the first time we did it, the actor that was playing Laura with me went up in the middle of the second act. And this is a very complicated mystery. The plot, thick plot. I mean, you could cut it with a steak knife. And she went up, and she was gone, I could tell. I mean, just her eyes were glazed over. And finally, they just rang the telephone bell. So I went over and I picked up the phone. I said, yes. And the ringing telephone was a cue that I had for the last line of the act. So I gave the last line of the act. And we cut out half of the exposition of this play. And afterwards, people say, "Oh, it was wonderful. We loved it." I said, "Did you follow all of it?" He said, "Oh, yes. Good for you." No, it's funny.
And then after that, you had Brenner in New York?
Brenner was a show that I did in New York. It was the first acting job I ever had.
Was that live?
No, not live. But we set up the scene of I was waiting around, and then it came to my scene, and they set everything up. They came in and said, "You ready?" And I said, "Well, were you going to rehearse?" He says, "Yeah, that's your mark. Got it? Good. That's your rehearsal." And yeah, that was a bit traumatizing for a young actor.
Yeah, I mean, coming from theater, what was it, working in television like?
Well, very different. We have young actors now. We had one kid that was on Days of Our Lives who had never done a play. And one of the other guys there had got a hold of a new play and wanted to do it and asked him if he would care to be in it. And he said, yes, he would. They rehearsed for 2 days. And he said, okay, let's get it on. He says, oh, we still have 3 more weeks of rehearsal. What the hell are we going to do for 3 more weeks? Couldn't imagine, because he's used to doing soaps, instant acting. So it was very enlightening.
As an actor, which do you prefer? Do you like a lot of rehearsal?
Not too much, but I do like a little.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me a chance to learn my lines.
So how do you think those early kind of theater experiences that you had helped you develop as an actor?
Well, it was very useful, especially in daytime, because daytime is about as close to theater as television gets.
How so?
Well, it's because you're playing scenes and not like, you're not patching things together. Although now we are. So that's gone too.
You mean patching things by kind of shooting out of order?
Well, yeah. I mean, we do shows now. I did a half-hour show in New York, and we would come in at 5 o'clock in the morning and be there sometimes till 3 in the morning. Don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're gone. They can't afford it anymore. I can't believe the amount of work that we get shot in a day. You know, we'll do bits and pieces of 5 shows.
Wow.
And then they patch them all together and you're in showbiz.
Well, we'll get to talking a little bit more about daytime, but in these early years, so like for Brenner, did you get that job the same way by going to the producer's office? When did you get an agent, or did you have an agent in those days?
You know, I did have an agent. I guess I don't remember the mechanics of Brenner,
Mm-hmm.
but I did have an agent, but I got him during the course of Little Mary Sunshine,
Which was an off-Broadway play.
which was, yes, it was the first off-Broadway play that got the carriage trade. In other words, the limos parked in front of the theater. Before that, you know, you say to a sophisticated New Yorker, well, we're going to go down to this little bistro down in the village. They have a little 40-seat theater. He said, no, I don't think so. So,
And that was 1959?
58, I think.
58.
November of 58. And I signed with the William Morris Agency.
And so then, were they sending you out on casting jobs?
They sent me out on different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed with Little Mary for 14 months. It ended up running, I was the second one to leave, I think. It ended up running for, I think, 5 years, 4 or 5 years. It was a send-up of the Jeanette MacDonald Nelson-Eddy musicals. Do those names mean anything to you? Nothing.
Tell us. Shed some light on it for us.
Well, they're operettas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Gilbert and Sullivan and all that sort of thing. And this was a send-up of those. But it was played very seriously. And the music was very melodic. And when we did the cast recording, the engineer who was recording the show said, that's beautiful. Why don't they write music like that anymore?
So
and
did
it's
you
serious.
sing?
And people would argue, would complain that they're trying to follow the play and the people behind them were laughing.
Did you sing?
No, I don't sing. I only sing to relieve pain. As a matter of fact, right after we opened, another play opened off Broadway called El Gallo. Who can help it? You know who El Gallo is? Try to remember a time in September when life was something and oh so mellow. It'll come to me. I'll call you tomorrow afternoon.
Perfect.
Anyway, it was a play that it was very successful and ran for years and years and years. And Jerry Orbach
Oh, yeah.
played this character called El Gallo, who was like a bandit.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was first released, to be done in, you know, like from French and Company, we could do it anywhere in the country. I was getting 3-4 calls a week to do El Gallo. I said, I'm sorry, but I don't sing. And they said, wait, but you're in Little Mary Sunshine. Yes, but I don't sing. I played a character in Little Mary called Chief Brown Bear. And the only reason that I did it was because my girlfriend was playing Little Mary Sunshine. And I was going to all the rehearsals and whatnot, and they were getting down to the wire. And one night, Rick Besoyan, who had written the play and the music and was directing it, and he said, "Oh, how would you like to play Chief Brown Bear?" His problem was he needed an actor, but he didn't have any money. So he says, "You'll get your money afterwards." Actually, after we opened and we were a big hit, they owed us $95, I think, in rehearsal fees. And they said, "You can have 0.1% of the show, or we'll give you the $100. So I took 0.1% of the show, and I got about $3,000 or $4,000 out of that.
Wow, pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So then in the 1960s, you had quite a few guest spots on television, some on the East Coast, some on the West Coast. So were you kind of flying back and forth doing various things?
No. I was in New York. I did Little Mary. I left Little Mary, and I did.
You were on a combat.
No, that was in California.
Mm-hmm.
I did another play called Ladies' Night in a Turkish Bath
In New York?
in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And what's his name? The critic, very well-known, famous critic for the Tribune in New York at the time, said, "I have been depressed in the theater. I have been exhilarated in the theater. Last night was the first time I was embarrassed just to be in a theater." It's an awful play, awful play. But it opened with the same director in Chicago, and it had been running there for 8 years. And basically, it was just a bunch of women walking around in towels. And then they wrote a comedy around that.
Now, were you hoping to make your career as a stage actor at that point? Or did you want to get more into television or more into film?
You know, nobody thought of it in those terms in those days. I mean, you got whatever job you could get.
Mm-hmm.
The agents would send you here, send you there. Example, Chris Reeve, who was in Love of Life with me,
Mm-hmm.
was auditioned for a play with Katharine Hepburn. And it wasn't a very good play. But she was going to do it, and they wanted him to do it opposite her. But he had an out in his contract with the soap for 6 weeks out of town. Well, this was going to be in Toronto for 8 weeks. And so he had to go to the producers and say, "Could I get an extra 2 weeks?" They said no. And he was all bent out of shape because this was a plum role. And he said, well, his choice is he could just do it. Say, I'll walk. Fire me, do whatever you want with me, I'm going to do it. Or he could not, turn it down. And he was in a dilemma, didn't know what to do. And I said, "Chris, do you want to be a soap opera actor for the rest of your life?" He said, "No." I said, "As far as producers in Hollywood are concerned, because one of his big worries was that it's a bad play and that he'll come off looking bad. I said, as far as the producers in Hollywood know, you are the lead in a play on Broadway opposite Katharine Hepburn. That's it. And you can take that to the bank. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And of course, as soon as he said that he was going to do it anyway, they said, well, we'll work it out. Which they did. Anyway, there were movie actors, there were stage actors, and they were soap opera actors. And they all had their niche. And generally, if you got a job, all the jobs I got while I was doing a soap, I got because I gave a hell of an audition. It had nothing to do with the fact that I was on a soap. In fact, we never told them that I was on a soap. Never told anybody. Because they didn't know. They don't watch soaps. They're busy they're gainfully employed during the day. So, a friend of mine wrote a play called Getting It On in Hollywood about a playwright who wrote this big, like, Death of a Salesman, big thundering applause and great play. But nobody ever wanted to do it in Hollywood. 20 years later, they come and this producer wants to do it. It's a very funny play. One of the funniest lines I've ever seen in a play. One of the main characters is the playwright, and he meets this girl in an airplane who's an actress. And they develop this relationship. And she's got a movie of the week that she's doing, and she's rehearsing the lines. Why is bad dialogue so hard to learn? He says, I don't know, it's easy to write.
That's great.
One of my favorites. Anyway, it was very compartmentalized. One of the characters in the play was the daughter of, like, Cecil B. DeMille or something. And she's engaged to this Adonis of an actor who does a series on TV. It's a huge hit. To her forever mortification, the fact that her husband is a television person, not only that, but a famous one, so everybody knows. But that's pretty much what Hollywood was. Yeah. I mean, when Steve McQueen made the jump from Wanted, Dead or Alive, or whatever it was he was doing, into feature films, it was a big, big deal. It's like actors doing commercials. You can do commercials. It's mundane. Until Laurence Olivier did one. They said, oh, well, it's very theatrical, too. So now it sort of goes back and forth. But we don't have any big movie stars anymore. Where are the Bogarts and the Clark Gables and all those people?
Well, before you kind of became known for soaps, you did do some of these primetime guest spots. We were talking off camera about The Virginian, which you said was a particularly fun one.
Well, not that it was particularly fun. It's the most fun I ever had on a show.
So why was that?
Well, because we were out on the Warner Ranch. When I first came out here, friends of mine said, don't worry about writing and stuff like that. They have, you ride into the shot and you ride out of the shot. And if there's anything complicated, they got stunt people that do that for you. Okay. So I get an audition for The Virginian, and they said, do you ride? I said, grew up in the saddle. And guns bother you? No problem with guns. I get the part and I get the script. First 4 pages are a chase. Joe Campanella and Catherine Justice riding double on a horse, and this other guy and I chasing him. I read the script and I went to a stable and I said, I don't care if I know what I'm doing as long as it looks good. He said, don't worry, I'll give you a horse to ride. You ride that, you ride any of those push buttons they give you. They call them hydromatic. Touch him once, he'll walk. Touch him twice, he'll canter. And sure enough, I had a horse named Bo. Fell in love with that horse. He did anything you told him to do the instant you told him to do it. And first shot we had was a hill about like that, almost 45 degrees at the top coming down. He just straight down the hill and down along the road. Full gallop. Full gallop. That was my first shot. That went very well. Then I had another shot. The first dialogue scene, it was to come up, and it was between, there were 2 trees. He said, we'll set it up between the 2 trees and then go back about 150 yards. And then just come straight in. Well, back at around 120 yards or 10 yards, there was a road. And the road went, there were the 2 trees, and here we were here. And as we came down here, this was the road, and then the road went like that. They said, well, you need to come straight. Well, coming straight meant jumping up a thing about 4 feet high. Make the shot match, the other guy was in front of me. As he made the turn, as he came up to make the jump, his horse wouldn't jump, he just turned, followed the road. And meantime, I'd been doing some fancy riding, and I was getting cocky as hell. I said, let me try it. And then yours will follow me, and then once they do it once, then they'll do it again. They'll switch. And sure enough, best piece of advice the guy gave me out at the stable when I was taking my lessons. He said, you get in trouble, take your feet out of the stirrups. Horse knows what he's doing, you don't. So that was the best advice I got. And then we rode down, stopped, and then we're going to do the dialogue scenes. And they're setting the squibs up in the trees. Little explosions. And looking around, the wrangler's got my horse. He's the one that picked him for me, but I was ever grateful. He said, you got the job, I'm picking your horse, do you ride? Anyway, he's holding the horse. And I said to him, is he going to be here? You know, is he going to be all right with all this explosion? He said, yeah, he'll be fine. First squib went off and the horse went 12 feet that way.